Joining us now, member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. Also with us, former Democratic representative from California, now Director, President, and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Jane Harman. Good to have you both with us this morning.
Senator King, what are we going to hear tonight that's going to move us towards resolution?
Well, who knows? I mean, my understanding is the speech is still being written. It will probably still be written as they're driving down to the Capitol. I hope there's some gesture of reaching out, of comity. I think there are areas where there can be common ground on opioids, HIV, infrastructure. We just did the big bipartisan criminal justice reform. So there are things where we can work together, but if he throws down the gauntlet and gives us another lecture about the wall, I don't think that's going to further the process.
Where is the middle ground there to avoid another government shutdown?
Well, I think the middle ground is to talk to people who really know something about border security and come up with a plan and say this is what we need, and it will involve dogs and sensors and drones and technology, perhaps some more people, more judges to deal with the influx of asylum seekers. And there may be places, and probably will be places, where there should be a barrier. I mean, the idea that there shouldn't be 1 inch of barrier, I don't think that makes sense either. So I think there is room, but it won't be the grand structure. And by the way, the $5.7 billion, that's a down payment.
Right.
What he really is asking for is more like $25 billion to build this enormous structure, which just doesn't make sense. Let me preface it in retrospect. There is nobody in the Congress who's for open borders. I'm so tired of hearing this.
Right.
You're for the wall or you're for
not.
open borders.
Yeah.
That's nonsense.
Well, why don't we just rewind it a little bit? There were no Republicans in the Senate, certainly, or in leadership, that were for the wall.
No,
until Democrats took control.
That's the dirty little secret. Is I haven't found, there may be some members around that I haven't talked to, but there's nobody with enthusiasm for the wall.
I mean,
otherwise they wouldn't have done it when they had full control.
Lindsey Graham, who's saying let's declare a national emergency, Jane, when Republicans had the power to fund a wall,
right,
said it was a bad investment.
Well, it is a bad investment. And to add to what Angus just said, which I agree with, it's borders, plural. I mean, we have much bigger threats through ports of entry all around our country.
All the data
and the Canadian border than we do over the Mexican border.
More people leaving.
Right.
On the southern border.
There is some message there about keeping different people out of the country. That is not a good message.
40% of the undocumented people in the country are on overstayed visas.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the wall. Asylum seekers, these so-called caravans, have nothing to do with the wall because they come to ports of entry. They're not crossing the Rio Grande into Texas.
Same thing with the drugs.
They are giving themselves up. They want to be arrested, so the wall has nothing to do with that. So it's a 1985 solution, or some would say an 885 solution for a 21st century problem.
And you talked about opioids. The president's talked about heroin. 90% of the drugs
ports of entry.
Coming from ports of entry. If we're going to invest, try to stop people from dying from drug overdoses in this country, that's where we put it. Now, the president is not getting his way with not only Nancy Pelosi, but also Mitch McConnell and Republicans in Congress. He's now talking about a national emergency. This is what John Cornyn, one of the top-ranking Republicans in the Senate, had to say about that.
I think it's a dangerous step. One, because of the precedent it sets. Two, the president's going to get sued, and it won't succeed in accomplishing his goal. And third, because I think Ms. Pelosi may well introduce a resolution of disapproval that will pass the House and then come over here and divide Republicans. So, to me, it strikes me as not a good strategy.
Senator King, that's a Republican, John Cornyn, talking that way. We've now heard that over the last week or so from the Majority Leader, Senator McConnell, as well, saying the national emergency is not the way to go, in part because of the precedent it sets for a potential Democratic president. Do you believe we're going to get to that point? I mean, the next shutdown deadline is a week from Friday. It's not that far off. Will we get to the point where the negotiation is so stalled that the president might actually make this leap?
I think he might, just as a way out. And this goes to a fundamental problem with this presidency, is that he has no sort of gut level feeling or understanding about how our system works. He thinks he's CEO of America and it's a family-owned company. And he can unilaterally say, we're going to build a wall, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And for the first 2 years, he had sort of a vacation that validated that because he had his party in control of both houses. Now he's got to realize that if he wants something, a wall or a change in some other policy, he's going to have to persuade the Congress or cajole or work with them. That's not in his DNA, at least not so far.
Another word for that, Jane, is he's going to have to govern.
Well, Joe, we were there together,
right.
And we are in different parties, and we work together. Another point I just make on this is the Senate's on trial, too. Angus is somebody who wants to make a deal. Maybe Mitch McConnell does, just maybe. But if it's just a re-election machine, and if it's defaulting on the separation of powers, we're in deep trouble. And I can't believe that Mitch McConnell, as the leader of the Senate, who wrote a book called Playing the Long Game, really wants the institution he is in charge of to shrink into nothingness. So I've heard just last night that there's an effort on the Appropriations Committee in particular to pull together a group of people on a bipartisan basis and come up with the funding structure to include border security done smart in a 21st century way.
That may include some barrier.
Yes, I don't see anything wrong. I voted for that. But then other things as well.
That you can offer the President of the United States so he can go to his base and say, remember that wall I promised you through those chants in 2015 and 16? Here it is. I got it out of the Democrats.
Well, one thing would be some portion of wall or barrier or whatever you want to call it as part of this deal, because it's not irrational to have that. I mean, I've been there. I've seen it. There already is 700 miles of wall. So something that picks out some of the gaps where, again, my suggestion is let's appoint a national commission on border security and have some experts tell us what's really necessary. And then we can do something based on the facts. One of the problems with this whole discussion is everybody's working on different facts. Who's coming in, how many, where are they coming? And, you know, all the recent trends are down in terms of illegal entry.
On the southern border.
On the southern border, exactly. Right. And let's try to deal with the facts. I'm willing to support barriers if indeed somebody who knows what they're talking about tells me that this is an important place where it would in fact be cost effective. By the way, it's about $20 million a mile. That's what we're talking about here. And the question is, what other uses of that $20 million can you do for border security that really would protect the national interest?
Well, and again, Michael, the president's going to be talking about the wall. I think we have to underline again, my former party, your party, had power for 2 years. And whether it was John Cornyn, whether it was Mitch McConnell, whether it was Lindsey Graham, you could go down the list, they all said it didn't make any sense. Even General Kelly, when he was being interviewed in the Senate to become DHS secretary, said, well, the wall, it's sort of an old-fashioned approach. They're a lot wiser
symbolically
investments.
Right.
So again, it just doesn't. Again, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make us safer, and it doesn't stop the flow of drugs into this country.
And everyone knows that, including the president, I think, ultimately. But the president has found himself in a political hotspot because of certain voices on the far fringes of his base that came out when he had sent the vice president up to the Hill to cut the deal, to say, yes, okay, we'll take $2.5 billion and we'll move forward on the plan that's on the table that the Senate passed and the House approved of and everybody was ready to go. And he said, I'm not signing that deal. And that's because those voices were raised. The ugly truth here is that inside the party in that 2-year period, Joe, as you know from talking to folks, nobody was moving on the wall. No one was talking about really. Nobody wanted the wall. Nobody wanted the wall. Everyone, whenever it would come up in those quiet circles, they would go, oh, yeah, okay, we're going to do the wall. So, next thing. Until that moment in December, where Coulter and Limbaugh and others said, if you do this, it's the end of your presidency. And that changed the entire dynamic. So now it is the most important thing Donald Trump has to do.
Well, but you know, that's the madness of it all. Here we have, again, as Bob Woodward was saying earlier, Senator, so many issues in front of us. We could talk about Syria. We could talk about Afghanistan.
North
we could
Korea.
talk about North
Russia
Korea.
and China.
We could talk about Russia and China. We could talk about, I mean, we could talk about domestically. We could talk about health care. We could talk about entitlement crises. There's so much to talk about. And we're talking about an imaginary crisis. As Jane said, we're talking about what's not really a political reality? It's a primal screen.
And let's talk about tonight. There's an opportunity tonight. There he is on international primetime TV with Nancy Pelosi on one shoulder and Mike Pence on the other shoulder, and an audience that has to behave, or I think has to behave, of the entire Congress, or most of whom will behave.
It's going to be a trip to see Nancy Pelosi sitting up there.
I know, but he has an international stage. Nobody understands our Middle East policy. I was just in Israel and Jordan last week. He has an opportunity to explain himself again, to maybe reinitiate his view to the world and his domestic view, too, and to pick a few topics like Angus was suggesting, infrastructure for one, where we could work together.
Well, and one of the ironies is that, and not to cast aspersions on the media, but the focus is always on the conflict. The very week of the Kavanaugh blow-up, which dominated everything, we passed an opioid bill 99 to 1. And it was totally bipartisan, heavily negotiated, a 2-year process. So things are happening. The criminal justice reform, heavily bipartisan. So those things can happen, but he's got to step out. I think you're the political strategist. He made a fundamental error in his strategy when he took office, which was to stick to his base. Most presidents, when they get elected, starts to reach out to the people that didn't vote for him and try to expand their authority. Well, he narrowed his.
And the reason for that was because, as Joe knows as well, he started meeting with resistance. From the very beginning, Donald Trump wanted to lead on infrastructure, but it was the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, who moved him off of that onto health care. Health care blew up. It went against his instinct. His instinct was to go with what he knew.
And that would have been a huge bipartisan bill.
And it would have been a huge bipartisan bill to sort of expand that opportunity. But because the political structure moved him in a different direction, he really started off not on a good foot, but on the wrong foot. And it sort of set, I think, the tone with how Donald Trump decided he was going to deal with Capitol Hill, and more specifically, how he was going to deal within his own party, which is why there was no movement on this issue.
How long is it going to be? Like Bill Clinton had long speeches. Sometimes they were too long, right? Or who had the long?
I've heard an hour.
I've heard an hour? He's going to speak for an hour?
That's what I've heard.
That's a bargain compared to Bill Clinton.
Yeah. No,
is he not going to have the teleprompter? I mean, what's it going to be? Is it just going to be a free
He's going to bore himself. He can't do an hour.
You know, with Bill Clinton, I mean, we were there at the same time. I'd go out, listen to the first hour, go back in the cloakroom, take a nap, go back out, listen to the third hour. You know,
I needed an intermission.
I was much more respectful than you, Joe.
Well, I'm not.
An hour? Really? Are you sure?
It could be.
I don't know.
Sure, it could be.
Disrespectful. It was just.
Senator Angus King, always great to have you on the show. Thank you, James.